Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I am honored to have Mike Hill with me. Mike is an author, he's an actor, producer, and a TV personality. And one of the things that I think you're going to hear in his story today that kind of transcends throughout is being vulnerable allows you to connect with people. And so, Mike, thanks so much for being on today.
So thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
You betcha. So in the younger years, grew up in New York, but ended up moving south. And in high school, you were actually named the Journalism Student of the Year. So talk a little bit about the early days and, just kind of what intrigued you or what got you going in the world of journalism and writing.
It's crazy. Like I'm glad we have this podcast called Who Knew in the Moment, because who knew in the moment, that was the direction I was going to take me in. I was in the 10th grade. And I had this English teacher named Mrs. Sanders. And I was always like a bit of a class clown, always the one that's talking and always disrupting, talking to the girls, trying to make them laugh, whatever. And Mrs. Sanders couldn't stand me, right? This was a black English teacher who really couldn't stand me. I remember one time my mom came up for a PTA meeting and she basically told my mom everything. She went in. As soon as my mom walked in the door, she's like, Mrs. Hill, I am so glad you are here because let me tell you about your son. And by the end of it, my mom, and even back then, you couldn't put your hands on kids as teachers. My mom gave this woman the authority to beat me if need be. Now, beatings back then, this is not what we're talking about now, but this is back in the 80s. And she's like, if he disrupts your class again, you have my permission to whip his, what, right? It was at the end, other kids could hear and all that type of stuff. So that gives you the background of how Mrs. Sanders felt about me, right? Mrs. Sanders was also the journalism teacher, right? So in the 11th grade, you started to pick your electives or what you want to do and all that type of stuff. You want to go into acting or whatever, which we didn't have, but journalism was one of those electives that was out there. Yeah. And she said, at the end of the school year, remember, this lady can't stand, she said, what are your electives? Why don't you pick journalism? I'm like, you want me to come back to your class? But here's the thing, I did it, right?
Yeah.
I think, hey, well, all right, so I'll take journalism. That's cool. Never thought about anything like that. So the next year, we're about to go into our journalism class. I find out Mrs. Sanders no longer teaching journalism. There's another lady named Mrs. Bedford that's teaching journalism. Mrs. Sanders knew she wasn't going to be the journalism teacher next year. I don't think she liked Mrs. Bedford. So once again, that led me into being in the journalism, but I loved it. I enjoyed every aspect about journalism. I enjoyed the investigative part, going out and talking to people and getting the story and coming back and human interest and writing those stories. And I was pretty good at it. And once again, like you said, by the end of my 12th grade year, I ended up being the journalism student of the year. And that kind of led me on my path there. So it's funny how somebody who couldn't stand me told me to get into a journalism class as a joke, thinking and it worked out for the best interest of me. So who knew in the moment?
Yes. Now, additionally, in your younger years, starting to enjoy sports, you played sports, but you also had a job with the Yankees, getting able to see some games. So talk a little bit about, work ethic, but also your passion and desire for, loving sports.
I will say this. Yeah, my work ethic is the reason why I have a white collar job now is because I realized at a young age that I did not want to work for a living. I mean, my first job in high school, I was working at a furniture store, putting heavy sofas in the back of people's trucks. When they came, they bought the furniture. I was working at the warehouse and doing all that, tying it down and all that type of stuff. So yeah, it developed a couple of muscles as a young man, but it wasn't something I wanted to do. I'd go home sore all the time. And then my first job when I went back to New York for the summer, I was working at Yankee Stadium, and my first job was sweeping the stadium after the games were over. So you'd find like necklaces and diamond rings and all that type of stuff if you got lucky, or a couple of dollars here and there. Yeah. But by the end of the night, you were filthy. I mean, like your shoes, your pants, you were just like, you were like a garbage man in a sense, because you were collecting garbage. And you 7 o'clock in the morning, and yeah, it was something I didn't want to do. So I started selling popcorn in the stadium, watching the games or whatever. And I always told my grandmother back then, even when we was, she lived right across the street from the stadium. She said, I said, one day I'm gonna work over there. And I thought maybe I was gonna play for the Yankees. Yeah. I was at an early age, I sucked playing baseball. So that wasn't gonna work out. But I always had a love and interest in sports, and ended up, years later, being able to work in that stadium as a journalist when I got my job in New York, covering the Yankees, a couple of World Series teams, being on the float with them as they went down the canyon, the heroes or whatever. So I fulfilled my dream in a sense, just not the way I thought it was going to be.
Yes. Now, additionally, you talked about, growing up, didn't come from a very financially, abundant lifestyle. And then in addition, there was also some tough times where a friend of yours was murdered. So talk a little bit about just the environment that you grew up in and, really how that shaped, hey, I don't want to stay here. I see that there's more opportunity for where my life can go.
Yeah, what's crazy is I think had I not been in New York before I came to Alabama, I often think how my life would have been different. I think when I grew up, when I went to Alabama, when I was living there was a different, and nothing against them, anything like that, but there was a different mentality, different mindset. A lot of the people, you got to understand, this was before the internet, before, Wi-Fi and all that type of stuff like that. Yeah. So we saw things that was on cable television, but they didn't seem achievable. They didn't seem believable. It seemed like, okay, Willis Drummond and Arnold Drummond of being adopted by a white king, that's never going to happen to me. The Cosby Show came out. Oh, yeah, well, hey, that's great, but it ain't happening in our lives because we didn't see anybody around like that growing up in the South. So there was a different type of mentality that was down there. But coming from New York, I was able to see a lot of growth. I saw a lot of wealth. I saw being able to go to Madison Avenue, being able to go downtown, go to the east side of Manhattan or whatever, and go to Park Avenue, and seeing that this is actually achievable and that I could do it if I put my best foot forward. So having that mentality going down south let me know that there was something better for me. So even though I grew up in a lot of, I wouldn't say, I hate to say poor conditions because I think poor is a mindset, but yeah, it was a poor mindset in some aspects. I never really felt like I was poor. I just felt like we was broke. We didn't have a lot of money, but my mindset was always of one that it's going to get better and I have to do what I need to do to make it better. And I still feel the same way even today, even though I've had some success, I feel like it's going to get better for me in the years to come.
Absolutely. So you have a love of sports, you're loving journalism, but life takes a little bit of a turn and you start looking more at kind of the governmental route and, doing different things for the government. So talk a little bit about how that came to be and, why you decided to pursue that.
Because when I was in Alabama, once again, you got to understand the mindset. My situation at home wasn't the best in the world. With my mom and my stepdad, I saw a lot of physical abuse. I saw a lot of mental abuse. I saw a lot of alcoholism. My dad, my biological father was never really in my life. My stepfather just wasn't the best role model in the world. I just put it at that. And I didn't have a lot of male role models around. And I saw people in my community going off to college, but they would normally go to college for a year and then they'd come back and then they end up just hanging out on the street corner, getting like some kind of job, working in a factory or something like that. And once again, like I said, my mind was different. I knew I wanted something different. So the only role models I really had growing up who were male that were older were my cousins who were like 6 or 7 years older, a guy named Reggie and a guy named William. And they went off to the military, went to the Air Force. And when I saw them come back, even after they had gone to college for a little while and gone to the military, they came back, they dressed nice, they had nice cars, and I'm like, yeah, that's the route I want to take. And then I also felt like, I can go there and I go into the Air Force just like they did, and give me money for college so I could graduate one day and I could pursue, a degree or whatever. So that's the reason, reason I took that route, going into the military instead of going to the 4-year university.
Yeah, absolutely. So, military, I didn't go. So thank you for doing what you've done. But I always think, people leave there and they say, it was good. I learned discipline. But I also feel like you probably don't feel that way day one. Day one, you may not be so appreciative of the discipline and the rigors that is the military. So talk a little bit about, that aspect and, going into something where you really start at the bottom of a totem pole and you're working your way up.
Yeah, I'm always thankful for my military service, being in there. Once again, it taught me a lot of discipline. I mean, I think I was already sort of disciplined, but not like structured in a sense. I knew if I had to be somewhere on time, like I was 2 minutes late for this podcast and it killed me. You know what I mean? I hate doing that. I like being on time for something and or at least letting people know that I'm going to be running a little bit late. And I usually am 5 minutes ahead of time. So it gave me that discipline. It also gave me a sense of teamwork and how to work with others and how to be a leader, but also if you see somebody who is a leader, how to respect the person who is in authority or whatnot, if they're doing their job and doing it to the best of their ability. But yeah, going in, it was a shell shock for a lot of things, for a lot of different reasons. I remember my first night going into the military and everything just being really quiet, getting off the bus, and it's real quiet. You got to understand, like you could hear a cricket, pee on a piece of cotton. Seriously, it was that quiet. And all of a sudden, you can tap, 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 and you hear the TI, the training instructor, coming in. And he gets on the bus with all of us recruits. He starts screaming, "Get up!" And he screamed at us, and everybody's running. And you're going upstairs. You're going to the dorm room. Well, first of all, you go get some chow. They make you at 1 o'clock in the morning. You're going to get some food, and they say you got 3 minutes to eat. And they got this piping hot piece of Salisbury steak and piping hot mashed potatoes that you have to stuff in your mouth. And all of us, I'm talking about, our mouths were destroyed at the end of the 3 minutes. Get up. Yeah. Get upstairs, get into the dorm, scrub everything down. They want you to, they say, shower and shave. I can't say the first word. They want you to shower and shave. You do that, and they said shave all your facial hair. That meant, your mustache and your beards. We had people in there shaving off eyebrows, nicks and cuts or whatever. And then by the end of the night, when they turn the lights off, it is dead silent in there, but you hear people crying. You hear grown men crying because they feel like, and I was one of them, like, man, have I just made the worst mistake of my life? Because it's a shell shock and you're scared. You're by yourself. You're 18 years old. You're away from family. You're away from friends. You don't have that protection of your mom or your dad or whatnot. And you're wondering what's going to happen. And once again, those 6 weeks of being in the military and the basic training were great. It shaped my life. And then the prep school and then the 6 years I did afterwards, man, it's helped me to be the man and the worker that I am today.
Yes. So you do transition and you get an opportunity, or you find an opportunity at a station in Maryland. So talk a little bit about the transition from the military and, getting into kind of the news and reporting side of things.
Yeah, who knew, man? I had no idea. I had sent out 75 tapes while I was in the military. I was interning while I was in the military. Had gone to a broadcasting school, and for about a year and a half, I sent out 75 tapes and I got like 72 rejection letters. I got 3 responses, 2 of them basically critiquing my tape. One of them was telling me how terrible I was and maybe I should start something else. Seriously, it was like that. I was not deterred. I was not going to give up. And the day I got discharged out of the military, the very day I got discharged out of the military, I had no job. I had a wife. I had given my place up. I was going to move to Virginia with my brother for a couple of months until I figured things out. But I knew I wanted the job in broadcasting. Now, mind you, I had turned down opportunities to get a job in the real world, in the corporate world. I had a secret clearance, so I could have gotten a contract with Boeing, making $75,000, $80,000 a year, whatever. Turned all those down because that's not what I wanted to do. I was passionate about being a broadcaster. Yeah. And so the day I got out, I remember the first sergeant saying, "All right, so Sergeant Hill, what are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I hope, it's broadcasting." He said, "Well, best of luck to you." I went to my friend's house because once again, we had given up our spot where we were staying for a while. And I just had to take a nap because I felt like I was in a little small minor depression, just like, okay, what to do? And I took a nap for like two hours. And by the grace of God, I got a phone call. My boy Q hit me up and he said, "Hey, man, somebody's on the phone for you." And it was a guy named Bob Borngesser from WHAG in Maryland. 2 hours after I got discharged, taking a nap. And he said, "Hey, you still want this job?" I had interviewed with him like a month prior. And he still want this job. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll take it." And it was making less than $7 an hour, but it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
So let's dive into that, because I think a lot of people, can see the success you've had today, and we're going to talk all about it. And they say, "Oh, well, this must just be what Mike did from the get-go." I'm sure he had had a family friend that got him a connect, right? And all that. And then you hear the story and you say, all right, the guy turned down good opportunities for the chance at his passion, for a great opportunity, right? But the great opportunity wasn't promised, right? You could have been at WHAG for the rest of your life, right? And you just never knew, but you were willing to take the risk. So talk a little bit about that, either from your standpoint or someone who's listening who's kind of in, that same situation of I'm playing it safe because, hey, there's this guarantee here where this is really what I'd like to be doing though.
No, because you only live once, and
Mm.
this is my life to live. So I'm a person that I will take calculated risk. I won't jump out on them. Now, if I have responsibilities or whatnot, I'm just not going to give up everything. Like, hey, I want to be an exotic dancer. You know what I mean? If I
Right.
like my kids to feed, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, I will take calculated risk, and I'll be smart about the prospects. I knew, okay, I could always go back and reapply and work at Boeing if it didn't work out. But I'm going to give myself this opportunity to see what I have. I do believe, and I know, like you said, who knew in the moment?
Yeah.
I always have known for some reason that there is something that's greater for me, no matter what my circumstances are, no matter what type of success I have. I just know if it's in me, if God is speaking to me, I feel like it's going to happen. And I make it come to fruition. I don't know where it comes from or why I feel that way, but it does. And it always works out. And I know it's going to continue to work out. So even in that moment, it was just my passion. Like I said, I gotten 72 rejections, 72 no's, but all I needed was that one right yes to turn things around for me. So that's why I always tell people now, even when I'm giving speeches or whatever, I'm like, yeah, you're going to hear a lot of no's. You're probably going to hear more no's, especially in this business, then you will hear yes until you become uber successful and everybody's throwing things at you. That's only going to be fleeting for a period of time unless you're lucky. I said, when you hear that yes, that one yes can change your life. And like you said, Bob Borngesser giving me that one yes changed my life. And even though it was making less than $7 an hour, it was my passion. And I knew if I have this passion inside of me and I love doing what I do, that is going to show. And if it shows, people are going to want more of me. And if people want more of me, then the money and the accolades and the platforms and everything like that comes with it will come. So once again, it worked out for me, and it continues to work out for me today.
Yes. So not too long after this Maryland opportunity, the accolades do come. And in 97, you moved to Tennessee and you actually get 2 Emmys for the work you do there. So talk a bit about just receiving, 3 years earlier, you're getting told on a tape, hey, you're not good at this, go do something else. And 3 years later, you've not perfected, but started to master a craft at such a way that your peer group is giving you an award for it. So talk a bit about that and just the transition for you.
Yeah, it's magical how this happens. Like I said, you can get that, you can hear so many no's, and then you hear that yes, and then all of a sudden it catapults you, and all of a sudden you start racing. Like I got to go back a little bit in order to answer that question.
Yeah.
Sound, 72 rejections. I get to Hager Sound. I'm there for 6 months. I send out 3 tapes. I get 2 callbacks. One is in DC, wanted me to come and interview in DC. I didn't feel like I was ready for DC at that moment. That was a huge jump from market 197 to a top 10 market. I wasn't ready. Yeah. And Fresno, California called me back, right? So out of 3 tapes, I get 2 callbacks. And I didn't even wait for the last one. I don't even know. Go out to Fresno, I work in Fresno. I'm in Fresno for a year and a half. I sent out 2 tapes. I get a call back and I get a job in Nashville, Tennessee. So I'm in Nashville within 2 years. So all of a sudden, because I'm on the air and I'm doing the job and I'm showing how happy I am doing the job and I'm pretty good at what I'm doing, and people can see that passion, they see that love, and they see that fresh face, bam, I'm catapulting, I'm moving. So I'm in Nashville. I get to Nashville. Things are great. People in the community are loving me and all that type of stuff. I'm getting along with everybody I'm working with and everything. And then, I do high school football, and we have great high school football coverage, and the Emmys nomination come, and it's a great team effort. We're doing that. But then even after that, it was like I'm being written up in national magazines talking about the next great things. I get local accolades or whatever and all that type of stuff. But here's what I always tell people. It's like that can be intoxicating. And this is what I warn people in any business that you're in. Success, fame, notoriety can be intoxicating. It can be very dangerous if you can't control it. And I'm not ever going to say that I was cocky, but it was a point. I wasn't arrogant, but there was a point where I felt almost untouchable. Well, I'm getting all these accolades. People are saying I'm going to be on ESPN. We'll be national pretty soon, all this type of stuff on the next this and that. And then there's a certain point where I think God humbles you. And not necessarily just you, but your growth. Sometimes you got to scale you back in order for you to go somewhere else. But you need to come back, because if you don't, you can go into that next phase of your career, your life, overly confident or cocky, and you can destroy that opportunity that God has given to you. So what it does is he humbles you sometimes, closes the door, makes you wait, makes you think about a couple of things, and that prepares you for that next big opportunity that you're going to have. And that's exactly what happened to me. I went from Nashville to New York. And then when I got to New York, 2 years in New York, man, 9/11 happens. The show I'm on runs out of money and I'm out of work. And I'm thinking, okay, even at that moment, I'm like, I'm out of work. Somebody's going to pick me up quickly because I'm Mike Hill. And zero. Don't hear anything for 6 months until I get a call from Dallas, Texas. That's how life is sometimes.
And so I would love to say that you head down to Dallas, Texas, and that's like the beginning of the trajectory. But actually, that's kind of like more spiraling, which leads to Florida, which leads to, I'm guessing, a part of you being like, what the heck is going on here? And like, am I supposed to continue to pursue this? Is there something else for me? And so talk just about that season and phase of, you've reached a certain level of success, but then you kind of go not down in your skill or talent level, but just, the industry. And one thing leads to another. And then eventually a door does open, but not after some hardships in two different locations.
This was the most difficult time of my life, between the years of 2002 and 2004, the most difficult times of my life. Right now, I'm going through a really difficult time I'll tell you about eventually. But 2002 and 2004, man, I went through a depression. Like I said, I had that sharp rise, and then all of a sudden I hit a roadblock and stumbled, out of work for 6 months, waiting to hear something, finally get a call back from Dallas, Texas. This legendary sports anchor down there hires me, who had been there for 20 years. They got the number one station in the market. He's the number one sportscaster. He's pretty much nationally known, even though he's a local sportscaster. And I go work for him, and it was the biggest nightmare of my life professionally. But once again, I take my burdens as blessings, because I learned a lot from that situation too. So while I was there, I get hired, and like I said, I have a certain style, and he saw it on tape. But when I get down there, he tries to change everything about me. Everything that I worked for in those 5 years that I've been on television or whatever, he just tried to like strip it down. It was almost like we were both sportscasters, so we were both fruit, but he was an apple and I was an orange. He tried to make an orange taste like an apple, and that's so I'm like, yo, it's okay. We're both sportscasters, but I'm just a different flavor than you are. And that wasn't happening. He was the boss. He had a huge ego, and he would talk to me any kind of way. But once again, being out of work for 6 months, he got a family. Mind you, my daughter was just born. My second daughter was just born. Money's running out. I'm not making that kind of money yet. So I'm scared. And I try to change, but it's still not good enough for him. And eventually, long story short, I get fired from Dallas. I still, and I was bitter for a long period of time because I felt like it had nothing to do with my skill set. It had a lot to do with me as an individual, as a Black person. I'm not a person that plays race card like that. Yeah. Like I feel racism, I'll talk about it, but I don't play it, because I just don't think that everybody, if you're just because you're Black, you get hired or fired. You know what I mean? Yeah. But with him, he would tell me things like, hey, I didn't think you were the best person for this job. I only hired you because you're Black. He told me. And that made me feel a certain kind of way. And I was like, you know what? And he asked me one time, he said, do you want to be a sportscaster? Do you want to be a Black sportscaster? So he would bring up a lot. He would bring up that what's crazy is you're in Omaha, Nebraska. He's from Nebraska, from Omaha, Nebraska. He is. He's from Omaha, Nebraska. And he would always tell me how he grew up and how he used to use the N-word and all that type. So all his backstory, but he was Teflon. So nobody could ever touch him. He knew it. So I knew there was a racial overtone to the entire situation with me being there, because I was the first Black sportscaster he had ever hired on a full-time basis. Right? Okay. Yep. Not hungry, but he just had problems with race. I'm not saying he's race. Anyway, got fired, and I'm out of work, and now I can't get touched by anybody. Nobody's touching me. Nobody's answering my phone. Agent can't get me interviews anywhere. and I spiraled into a deep depression, gained weight, contemplating suicide, contemplating whether I should be doing this or not. And I went through a valley. I went through a tough valley. And finally, after a long period of time, I finally get a bite after about a year. And Tampa, Florida wants me to come down. I know it's a long story. I'm sorry.
No, you're great.
Tampa, Florida wants me to come down there for an interview. I go down for an interview. And it's not a job I wanted. Don't get me wrong. But it's what I needed. I needed to get on air. Now, in the meantime, I had been doing some freelance work at Channel 5 in Dallas. So I was on the air after 7 months or whatever. And I was barely surviving, barely making it or whatever. But finally, full-time work, Tampa, Florida. Bam, get down there, kill the interview, kill the audition. The news director says, hey, straight up quote, he said, as long as I don't find out you're a axe murderer, the job is yours. Told me.
You're like, I'm in the clear then. I know I didn't do that.
I said, I don't even own an axe. You know what I mean? So I'm not worried about this. And he sends me next door to take the drug test. You take a drug test, you know, and that's like, I ain't done no drugs. I'm good. So go over there, take the drug test. And I'm waiting. I'm looking up, get back home to Dallas. Me and my wife and kid would, hey, moving to Tampa, blah, blah. Let's look at some real estate and all that type of stuff. We got to sell the house. 2 weeks later, nothing. Don't hear anything. Call my agent. Don't hear anything. Then finally, I had made friends with one of the producers down there. And I said, hey, man, what's going on? I haven't heard anything. Yeah. And they said, they're not going to bring you in, bro. He said that the guy, your old boss is SHI, you know, it's crap, right? Yeah. And I'm like, and this is when I lost it. When I tell you, I lost it, bro, to the point where I saw red and I've never been more angry in my life. Mm. So now he's messing with my mindset and he's messing with my livelihood. Now he's messing with my family and keeping money out of my family and food out of my family's mouths. So I get in my car and I go crazy. I'm driving down the tollway in Dallas. And I told this story plenty of times. I drive down the tollway in Dallas and I'm flying. I'm going down there. And I have bad intentions. And I'm not even a bad person, but I had bad intentions. Like this night, this man was going to feel my wrath one way or the other. I was going to physically harm him, his car. I was going to jail that night. I don't know what the charge was going to be, but I was going to I don't know if it was going to be attempted, whatever. It was going to be assault. But yeah, trespassing, I was going to get to this man some kind of way. I had intentions to really hurt this guy. And I hate myself even saying that I allowed him to take me that far, but he did. Mm-hmm. And when I get halfway down, it's like 100 degrees outside, even at night. And I got my air conditioner blasting and I'm still sweating. Mm-hmm. I roll my window down because I'm just that hot and I'm screaming. And as I scream, I hear a voice from the wind. And the voice, I swear to God, it says, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? He says, don't do this. I have something better for you. My God, man, I get emotional even thinking about that, man. That's like, that right there changed my life, man. And immediately I calmed down. And I get off on the next exit. And I go back home and I just pray. I'm sorry, bro.
You're great.
I pray and I'm like, God, whatever you got for me, I'm willing to accept. And I tell you, a couple of months later, I had an audition at ESPN and I got a call at ESPN. Yeah. Had I gotten the job in Tampa, I would have never gone to ESPN because I wouldn't have been able to be there. My time would have passed up. Had I gone down there and hurt this man, my whole career would have been done. I would have been over. You know what I mean? Yeah. Had I gone through what I went through, had I stayed and said he was nice to me in Dallas, I would have been happy in that because I was just tired of moving around at that time. Right. Wasn't thinking about national. I just wanted to just have a good life. I had a good house in Dallas or whatever. But because of what I went through, because of those burdens, because of that valley, because of that time of just being in the desert, I had to grow. I had to be pruned back. And there was something bigger and better for me because of what I went through. And once again, being at ESPN, just everybody knows, like, as they say in history, that's what she wrote. And it catapulted my career to where I am today.
Yes. One, thank you for sharing that story. I think there's so many people that are going to hear that and say, oh my gosh, like I've been in that spot where I thought doors were closing, right? But if I kept pursuing what my passion was, eventually the doors will open again. And
Yes.
so they open in a big way for you. Now,
Mhm.
something that I'd like to hear just a little bit on your perspective is, to your point, hey, don't like to talk, or focus on the race piece. But, earlier in your story, you mentioned, hey, growing up, I didn't see a lot of people like me on TV, right? Or I didn't see a lot of people like me that gave me hope for what was possible. And I think you're still in a very niche industry, right? Where a lot of people that are on screen are ex-athletes, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you got your Stephen A, right? But I mean, there's not a lot of folks that aren't on the ex-athlete side. And so you're still kind of breaking down, barriers really. And now you get to be the person that some kid somewhere is watching and be like, hey, well, Mike Hill didn't play professional sports, but he still made it to, the pinnacle of his industry. So talk, just about that and just, what you're able to do for somebody that's, 10, 15 years old and is like, man, I want to be like, Mike and Stephen A someday.
I think that's important. I'm glad you talked about that, and there's a distinction between what I do because a lot of people look at what we do on television, and some people say, "Oh, he's an analyst." I'm not an analyst. An analyst is a former player, somebody with an opinion, somebody who had the background to be able to speak on certain things. Now, I know a lot about sports, but I didn't play at that level, never a coach or whatever. So I'm not a pundit in a sense. I can be a pundit where I can debate if I wanted to go back and forth, and that's a lot of where sports is going. But the
Yeah.
fact that I am a sportscaster, I've been an anchor, but I am a host. And I
Yeah.
think that is the distinction I want to make as far as being a host on television. Still to this day, you don't see a lot of Black hosts
Yeah.
who look like me, like a Black male host, especially.
Yeah.
Not that it's it's me, trying to think of, you see James Brown, Kurt Menefee can be a host or whatever, and all these people, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's a distinction. A
Yeah.
traffic cop, somebody who moves the conversation. I can get the show from one place to another. And I think that is something that is really special. And that is something that I hold to a high degree because we're the ones who are in control. Pundits are
Yeah.
people, you can have a debate in the barbershop and nothing
Right.
against them,
Right.
but it's an opinion. It's like
Yep.
passion, opinion, give a couple of facts, objective, say something that's crazy to make people like, oh, you're crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that everybody can do that, but
Yep.
that's a different job. Being a host is a whole nother skill level. And a lot of people can't be a host. They really can't. They can be an anchor and do
Yep.
highlights, but being a host is something different. So it gives me a lot of pride knowing that I'm one of the few Black male hosts out there still to this day. So when people look at me, especially little Black kids, Black
Yeah.
boys and girls, or even just in general, anybody looks at me, I hold that because I feel like I'm in control of that show. I'm the one that is running the show, even though you may have bigger names on the show, former athletes. I'm still the one running the show, and to be able to this past season be able to host Big Noon Kickoff and do a game like the Michigan Ohio State game and do 3
Yeah.
hours pre-game coverage before that, and we get 18, 19 million people who are watching us or whatever. That is something that's so special to me. I could do First Take. I've done First Take before. I could do Undisputed. I could do all those other shows, whatever. But being a host, that is why when people ask me what I am a TV host. I'm not an
Yes.
anchor. I'm not a sportscaster. I'm a TV host because I could do that even outside of the world of sports. So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
You betcha. So you end up being with ESPN, was it about 9 years?
Yep. Mhm.
And then the opportunity or the transition to Fox happens, and there's a lot of great chances for somebody. So talk a little bit about, what the catalyst was to make that move and, where that led you.
Well, what's crazy? It's like this your podcast is perfect because a lot of my life was so when you asked me to do this and you said who knew,
Yeah.
because who knew, like, once again I always say burdens to blessings. Everything
Mm.
that's been a burden in my life has turned out to be a huge blessing in my life,
Mm.
especially in a lot of ways personally, right? So I like the idea of this and then turning things around and you seeing like, man, who knew at this point I was going to do this? I've been able to overcome that. So I had been at ESPN for 9 years, and once again, great network, but I was never one of their main guys. I could do
Yeah.
every show in the building, but I think that kind of cost me because I was a utility guy. I could do. It wasn't like I had one niche where, and I could, if I wanted to, I could kill it and destroy it if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But because I was so versatile and could do every show in the building, they could put me here and plug me in, plug me there, but I never had a home. And I was in favor with some of the big wigs. And I think it's a lot of political things that go on when it comes to anything in any business that we have. And nothing against them, that it was their choice. And I respect them. And like I said, those 9 years were great years for me because it helped me to get to the point where I am now. It gave me the exposure. But I was never their guy. And at the end, I had a radio show. And the radio show was on the air for about a year or two. And then I was doing TV, but I wasn't doing as much TV. So it's funny they're going through the cuts they're going through right now because he was going through the cuts he was going through. Now, in the meantime, I was finding myself being really disgruntled with ESPN. Like, I just wasn't happy because I wanted to have a home. I wanted to make more money. I wanted to get more respect and whatnot and all that type of stuff. Ego still gets in the way a little bit, but it's still, I felt like I deserved that. Yeah. So I had decided that, okay, my contract was coming up in 2014 and it was 2013. I'm like, I'm not re-signing at ESPN in 2014. I'm just going to take off, leap of faith, do what I need to do, come out to LA or whatever. But when my contract's up in 2014, I'm going to resign. Now, in the meantime, Fox Sports 1 had just started up and they were looking for, and they wanted me. They brought me in January of 2013. And he's like, Mike, you'd be perfect. I didn't even know it was a job interview. I came in, it was like, I thought it was just a general meeting. And I had all these executives around. It was like, you'd be perfect for us. We really want you here. And I'm like, what? Y'all started? I didn't realize they were starting a network. It just will come with the network. And I'm like, man, and we're gonna have fun. We're gonna bring the fun back. We know you're a fun guy. And I'm like, is this a joke? Is it somebody messing with me? I'm thinking I'm waiting for like the prankster to come out or whatever and all that. So my agent was like, yeah, this is great. But once again, my contract wasn't up for a year and a half. And it was like, can you get out of your contract? And I'm like, well, if you make me an offer, I'll get out of my contract. But they couldn't make me an offer until I was out of my contract. I'm like, I can't get out of my contract, out of my contract, and then all of a sudden things go wrong. That's not smart, right?
Right.
They wouldn't do it, so I felt stuck. So from January until May, I'm like, every day I'm thinking about FS1 and coming out to LA and having a good time. It was almost like being in I hate to say it this way, a relationship with somebody that you've loved for a long time, but you know you're at the end, and and the new woman comes along and she's everything you ever asked for, but you're still married. You got to get her. So I just didn't want to be there anymore, and I was depressed going through that the last couple of months. So long story short, we get around and Fox won't offer me a contract. I'm afraid to ask ESPN to let me out of my contract, even though I know I don't want to resign in 2014. May comes. This is how God works once again. Who knew? It's how God works in the moment. I get to May of 2013, and I remember somebody from HR, it was one of the people from the talent department, called me and she's like, hey, can you come meet in Mark Gross's office? He was the head of production at the time at ESPN. Meet me in Mark Gross's office in the morning before your shift. I'm like, oh, what? I'm wondering what's going on. I'm like, well, what's this all about? Now, somebody had talked to me about doing something and being a host of this show. This guy named Jamie Horowitz wanted me to do this and say, hey, you'd be great for this. I'm like, okay, well, maybe they're finally going to be a step up or whatever. I'm thinking this. So I called my agent. I'm like, hey, you know what this is all about? They want to say. And my agent then informed me, said, man, tomorrow's going to be your last day. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What? I had just gotten all my reviews were great. Mike, you're killing it. You're doing all this is wonderful. Once again, radio show successful, doing TV, versatile, doing all that type of stuff, but salary or whatnot. And said, hey, man, things make these decisions. So I'm like tripping. I'm like, man, I'm still on the contract. So I get to the meeting that morning. I come in and I remember the lady from talent, she just looks at me. She's like, I'm sorry, buddy, blah, blah. I'm like, sorry, like, I don't understand. Like, what's going on, right? So it's still 2013. So I sit in the office And he sits me down. He's giving me this speech. He's telling me, hey, this is what they do when they're not going to renew your contract or whatever. They're like, hey, things just happen. We have to make these decisions. Basis, nothing against you, anything like that. But we just feel like blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm like hearing all this and I'm like just like zoning out. And I'm hearing like Charlie Brown's grandmother, whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm like, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I could have gone to Fox. Fox had already hires. I said, they called me and I said, I wouldn't even ask God on my contract because I was afraid. It's like, why did you come to me? Now they're saying, why did you come to us? We could have worked something like you could have come to us and we would have probably let you out and all that type of stuff. I'm like, I'm afraid. I'm like, if I ask you and you say no, I want to leave, then you're going to hold that against me.
Absolutely.
I don't want to do that. It's not business. That's not good business. And so I'm saying, I just don't understand. I'm like, you're saying, I'm like, but 2014, my contract's not up until 2014, blah, 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 blah. And they're not even listening to 2014. And finally, after like 15 minutes, the lady asked me, she says, Mike, you keep saying July of 2014. What's July of 2014? And I'm like, and that's when I knew that they didn't know that my contract was actually up in July of 2014. And I said, well, my contract isn't up until July 2014. I have a guaranteed deal, right?
Yeah.
They go through the paperwork. They thought my contract was up in July of 2013.
Oh, no.
Huge mistake, right?
Yeah.
So they're, blah, blah, blah. And I've told this story before, and I'm not trying to embarrass them, anything like things like this and whatnot. And like I said, I'm very thankful for what they've been able to do for me and whatnot. But they made that mistake. And since they made that mistake, they let me out. I'm like, okay, well, I'm free. I can go wherever I want to. Plus, I'm getting paid for another pretty much a year and a couple of months or whatever. So next day I get on a plane. Who knew? Go out to LA, audition at Fox the next day. And then a month later, Fox hires me. And I work out a deal to get money. So basically, they pay for my daughter's college tuition and whatnot. And I get a job at Fox Sports. So that worked out. Yep.
I love it. So something I want to highlight, just as you've talked about your story, is kind of twofold. One, how you're resilient, right? I mean, you heard no, you had doors shut, but you kept at it. And at the same token, you weren't rash in decision making, right? You kind of let things happen. You let the stream take you down as it should. And so I think that's a fine balance, right? Of not being so resilient that you're just busting down doors that weren't meant to be opened up, because then you put yourself in a bad spot. And at the same token, not being so laissez-faire that you're not taking initiative, right? You're like, oh well, it'll happen at some point. It's like, well, sometimes you have to be the catalyst of it happening, right? Like if you don't put the effort in, it may never get you down, downstream. So talk about that balancing act of taking initiative, being resilient, but at the same token, not being so rash to a decision that, hey, the second Fox gave you the opportunity, you're like, see you, ESPN, and you burnt a bridge and now you're stranded on an island.
Well, I mean, everything has to be calculated. I think once again that I learned that from being in the Air Force. They teach you that structure. They also teach you about strategy, and it's important. So your whole life and anything you do, any project you take on, you're taking on. But so when it comes to your own personal life, you have to strategize. What's best for me? I ask questions. I put it in God's hands first and foremost, and ask Him to deliver my steps for me because He's already predetermined. Because I have that strong spirituality, but at the same time, I'm very thoughtful about, okay, if I make this move here, how will this affect A, Y, and Z? Not just me, but my kids and everything else and my responsibilities. Can I take that time off? Am I able to afford this in the meantime or whatever? So, yeah, I mean, I'm very structured in a sense. I take risk when I feel like I can take that risk and it's not going to hurt me that much. It's almost like investing. You got these stocks that are long-term stocks that you have, high risk stocks or whatnot. You get a big, strong reward if you put the risk in, but there are certain stocks that are very conservative that you put your money into or whatever. So I'm kind of in the middle somewhere. Yeah. And I'll jump off every now and then. Like right now, it's easier for me to kind of go out and do the things I want to do because my daughter's out of college. Yeah. I've been part. I got them out of college. My youngest just graduated 2 weeks ago. she's on her own, she's doing her thing, but there's still some responsibilities I have for them, just in case. And I don't want to end up being on the streets myself. So yeah, I mean, it's important to follow your dreams and your passion. Once again, it goes all the way back to the Hagerstown versus going to Boeing somewhere or whatnot.
Yeah.
Follow your passions, follow your dreams, what's in your gut, but at the same time, be very strategic about how you go about it and look at the loss versus reward. And sometimes, you're going to lose a couple of things before you gain something, but I'm willing to take that chance if it's not going to harm somebody else.
I love it. Now, another neat thing that you had the opportunity to do was to be the voice for the audiobook for Mr. Deion Sanders' book. So talk a little bit about how that whole thing came to be and, once again, adding that to the resume.
That was great because, I'm actually looking at it right now. It was that was back in Nashville. And I just, once again, I was a local sportscaster. People liked me there. I was pretty popular in the area. And he was writing his book at the time, Money, Power, Sex. And they said, hey, we're doing an audio version of it. And they brought me in. And I think I did too. I got paid crap, to be honest with you. I just didn't know how to negotiate that stuff. I'm like, I only got paid that much money for the audio version of a book or whatever. Like, that's crazy. But at the time, I thought that was good money. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And the fact, and what's crazy is because I did that, that led to a relationship with Deion. Now, I had never met him before, didn't know him at all or whatever. But the first time I met him, I was actually in an airport, and he and Michael Irvin ran into each other. And I walked up to him like, hey, man, blah, blah. I wasn't a national sportscaster. Nobody knew who I was, whatever. And I saw him. I said, hey, man, I did your audio. He's like, okay, blah, blah. Just small talk, just kind of blew it off or whatever. And then I saw him again in Dallas when I was there. He was living in Dallas. Yeah. He used to bring his kids who are now playing football into the same barbershop. And we used to get our hair cut. And he knew me on the air then. And he liked my style. And we became cool. We've been cool ever since then and whatnot. But yeah, that was a great opportunity. And, I think about that often because I've written my own book and now I need to do the audio version of that. So, and that was a lot of work too. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Well, and that's a perfect segue. So you talk about writing your book and just how much reflection and digging you had to do and how almost therapeutic or maybe uncovering what what things needed to be, uncovered and dealt with came from it. So talk about being willing to deal with past events, right? And navigating those so that way they don't continue to just bury and fester and prevent what could be in the future with relationships for yourself, whoever it is that's coming in your sphere.
That's super important, man. I'm a huge advocate for mental health awareness, and just advocate for therapy in itself. And, growing up in the communities I've grown up in, and a lot of us, a lot of Black men, a lot of us don't embrace therapy. It's just something that, was actually kind of a bad word in a sense, because we had to take everything to Jesus, or you just didn't tell people your business. So we grew up with a lot of the paradigms and a lot of the same issues over and over. The generational, warp continues. It's almost like a rotating cycle. What my dad did to me, his dad did to him, or whatever, how it affected him is going to affect me, and so on and so on. But it came to a point where I had a story to tell, everything I'd gone through, talking about domestic violence, my dad being a hitman, best friend being the killer, drive-by shooting or whatever, everything that I went through in my life, seeing and growing up, there was a lot of trauma that was there that I never dealt with. I just suppressed, just like a lot of people who are in my shoes. And it started taking a toll on me. And I didn't even realize it was taking a toll on me, because I was out here in LA about 5 or 6 years ago, and people have always said, you need to write a book because you got a story to tell. I'm like, man, nobody will hear from me. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not that kind of person or whatever. But it became a point where I needed to write a book because it became therapeutic, because I would sit up in my house and I was making great money, living this great lifestyle. People would see me on Smile, making everybody else smile, being the life of the party. But I was hurting on the inside, and be at home crying, wondering why I'm crying or whatever. Why am I making everybody else happy and I'm just miserable and I don't know why? And something said, once again, the voice, write the book. Start the book, and it became like, I don't know, man. It's like a spirit. I was regurgitating all this hurt, this anger, this bitterness, this trauma just started coming out of my body, and I felt lighter every time I would write. So it became something I had to do. And if I wasn't writing, I was like hurting. So every time I let it go, I would let it out.
Yeah.
And eventually it just turned out to be my life story of everything. I look back on it and I'm like, man, you went through all that. So I had to make it and say, okay, I'm not just going to write and tell people my tale. How did I use those life lessons to overcome in life? What did those things teach me? How did they affect me or other people? And how have I grown from that? And that's why I wrote Open Mic, not as necessarily my memoir to tell people all my business, but to tell people the embarrassing moments or the hurtful moments or the things that I'm not necessarily so proud of in my life, what I've gone through in order to be able to overcome, and how other people, if they take the right steps in the right direction, how they can overcome as well.
I love it. One of my good friends, he says frequently, Phil, we admire people from a distance and we connect with them when we get to learn about them and where they've come from. And so I think there's no doubt, obviously to your point, you've reached certain levels of success and there's more to come, right? This isn't the ending of it. There's more to come, but people can see that and think, oh man, well, Mike's got a great life, probably gets paid well, he's got a lot of great opportunities. And yet to your point, yeah, but there's the other guy, right? There's the off camera where I'm still human. I still have issues. I still have things that I have to deal with.
Yeah, but the perception out there, people see you from a distance, and this is like social media has become one of the best blessings, but also one of the biggest curses that we have. So I think it's one of the best and worst inventions in the world. It could be great if it's used the right way to get the word out about certain things that's happening in communities that people aren't aware of and doesn't get enough coverage, so you can get the coverage so things can change or whatever. But it's also a curse because now people have this I would say unrealistic vision of beauty, of success, of this and that, and they compare their lives to people who are public figures who have a lot of followers and a lot of admirers. And I think that's the responsibility that I feel like when it comes to a public figure such as myself, that yeah, we can share, hey, we're successful, we're living this, we're doing all that type of stuff, man. But it's important also to let people know that you're human just like them.
Yeah.
It's important to let people know that you hurt just like them. It's important to let people know that hey, you're going through a lot of the issues that they go through in their lives. Even if you can afford it, still like mentally you're hurting. So that's why I don't just put out things that are, I would say, people will smile and laugh at and kind of admire or even hate on in a sense, but I put things out and let people know I'm vulnerable. I can be transparent about my life. Now, I'm not sharing everything with people, and I'm not trying to get sympathy. I'm not trying to cry to people or whatnot, but I feel like I'm one of those people that knows it's okay to say I'm not okay. And that I have those moments, like the last year and a half of my life. Once again, it's perception. People see this and they think you're successful. I see you on Fox, you did this and all that, man. But the last year and a half of my life has been the worst year and a half of my life. The worst. It has been like losing, getting a divorce, to losing four of my really close friends to death. The job I was working on in last March, full-time job, they went into bankruptcy. So similar to what I went through between 2002 and 2004, kind of going through it now without the deaths. And there wasn't a lot of people dying. So all this is happening, but because of what I've gone through in my life, because of what I've been able to overcome, because of the scars that I have, that I can look back and say my skin is tougher because of that.
Yes.
I'm able to feel like, okay, I got through it once, I can get through it again. The first time I went through it, it made me depressed because I had never gone through it before. Now I'm like, I'm older, I'm wiser, I'm more knowledgeable. And even though it's all happening at the same time, like, okay, well, it's another burden that's going to turn into a blessing. So even though I'm doing this right now, even though I'm going through this is what I'm learning. This is how I'm growing. And this is how it's going to make me better going into the next phase of my life.
Mic drop. There's nothing that can end this conversation better than that. So, Mike, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story and the pivotal moments, the highs and, some of the valleys in there. But I'm just excited to continue to follow your story. And I know as long as you're open to it, we'll have to do this again in 2 or 3 years to hear how this one transitions into the next mountaintop moment.
Thank you so much, Phil. I appreciate it, man. Thank you. Good luck with your podcast. I love it. I love the idea.